Hi everyone. I'm Toni Pace Karstensen. I'm chair of the VES Vision Committee, and on behalf of the VES and Dolby, I'd like to welcome all of you to the event this evening. As you know, the visual effects industry has become increasingly global. We have artists working all over the world. Our panel today will share their experience and their suggestions for making the experience of working overseas effective, comfortable, and safe. Our moderator is Scott Squires. Scott Squires is a VES fellow and a visual effects supervisor. Some of his feature credits include Dragonheart, The Mask, Close Encounters, and Star Wars: Phantom Menace. He is currently CTO and creative director of Pixvana. Please join me in welcoming Scott Squires.
Thank you, Toni. And once again, Toni heads up the Vision Committee, and she does all the footwork and everything to make these events happen. So thank you again, Toni. Excellent.
Thank you, Toni.
So we have a great panel tonight. We've got Jeff Okun. Jeff is a visual effects supervisor and the first chair of the VES. Jeff is also editor of the VES handbook. His feature credits include Alpha, One, Blood Diamond, and the Fantastic Four. And Jeff is also a fellow as well. So next is Ruth Irvine Hauer, executive producer at Proof. She recently completed visual effects producing on War of the Planet of the Apes at Weta in New Zealand. And next to her is Bob Coleman. He's the president of Digital Artist Agency and co-chair of the VES Business, Labor, and Law Committee.
And chair of the awards committee.
And chair of the awards committee. All right. And next is Pierre Couture. Okay, account executive, media and entertainment, North America. He's with Lenovo. It's a company with visual effects facility, animation facilities, and game companies in U.S. and Canada every day. So they tend to work with quite a range of the different companies that we deal with. So as Toni mentioned, there's been a lot of globalization in visual effects, obviously, over the last decade or two. And so what we're hoping to do today is try to cover things that makes it easier for visual effects artists to go from location to location as need be. We're hoping that we can provide insights and some tips and things to prevent some of the problems that people have when they travel. The other thing is, obviously we're talking crossing borders, but it's also a big deal to move even from city to city. And the other thing to keep in mind, some of this is, you're going on location for a shoot, and other times you may be going for a visual effects facility, and some of those things overlap, and some of them are slightly different in how they're approached. And obviously it makes a big difference if you've got a short-term project or you're looking to permanent, and I use that word lightly, to move to a location. So. Anyway, why don't we get started? We could cover quite a bit in more time, but let's. I'd like to go through and have the panelists talk about some of their, just a short best experience and maybe one of their worst experiences at another location. Jeff, you want to start us off?
Well, first, thanks for letting me be here. I know 95% of you in the audience, and I think I owe some of you lunches or coffees. So, give me a call. I won't be doing much soon. I've worked on every continent on the planet except for South America. I've never done there. Been there, done that. And, the best experience for me, personally, there's 3 of them, but ranked this way: Australia 3, New Zealand 2, and Thailand is 1. As I learned in Thailand, not only how to eat right, but I learned with the Thai people, a smile meant more than anything else. And if you frowned at them, they tend to sit down and refuse to do work. So that was an experience beyond belief, watching, and I can say this out loud now, watching Rennie Harlan belittle some poor little Thai guy caused the entire crew to sit down. And he stormed off, got in his little speedboat and zipped away to some fancy restaurant. And Cookie Lopez, who is the AD, he goes, "Jeff, come with me for a moment." And he goes, "See all these people?" He goes, "Smile." So like, there you go. And they all started standing up because now we can work. And it was that's called the land of a million smiles.
Oh, I thought it was 13 smiles. I thought there was an actual number. Like it's 13 smiles, and they all mean something different.
All right, that was the best. The worst experience was being in Malta. Malta, everybody knows where it is, right? 60 miles south of Sicily, in the middle of the Mediterranean Ocean. It's a very confused and mixed up place. The food at this time in their history, food's changed all over the world, but the food at this time in history was Italian as taught to the Arabics by the British. I don't know Arabic, but Northern Africa, Moroccan people. So that sort of described the whole thing. And in brief, what that experience, two very brief stories, is you have your breakfast every morning with the crew, and then it's like, well, we got to get stuff set up. And the Maltese crew, who are great, except for this, would go, "Why me? I haven't finished my pastry yet. He should be the one that has to go set that up." And then we'll go down the whole line of 160 people. And it was just simpler to do it yourself. And because it's an island and you needed a crescent wrench one day and you go into the store, everybody in Malta is related to everybody in Malta. And so you go to the store and it's like, and they say your name twice in every sentence. It says, "Hey Jeff, my friend Jeff. You want this crescent wrench, my friend Jeff? This is $300 US. And you go, "Well, that's ridiculous." You go to the next store and they go, "Jeff, my friend Jeff, I hear you're looking for a crescent wrench. $350. Mine's better than his." And you just wouldn't do it. And getting off the island, they placed the entire crew under arrest. And we had to go to the airport, and the police and the Treasury Department was there, and like they charged you, like I have a laptop. The production had to pay $25,000 to get my laptop off. Everybody that had a laptop had to pay this kind of money, and it was crazy. So that was the worst experience.
Wow, wow. That's amazing. I actually was, born and raised here, and I worked at Disney for 12 years in the visual effects department. So I traveled on behalf of Disney, which to London and all over the place. It was great. After Disney, I was invited to work at WETA, and it was my first experience of moving out of the country, away from my family for 2 years. And since I was invited, I was so excited that I didn't think about the repercussions of moving to a foreign country. It was both the best and the worst experience of my life. And I could sit and talk to you for hours about it. It was an incredible place to work. Culturally, it was much different, even though we spoke the same language. Completely different culturally. I didn't do my homework about tax repercussions, about the way I was paid. I was not prepared for what ended up happening, but the movie came out, it's great, and there's a lot to talk about in this arena, so.
I guess it's up to me. Digital Artists Agency represents visual effects artists for motion pictures, entertainment, television, commercials, primarily. We have artists that are from all parts of the world, and we have artists that want to work in all parts of the world. So our job is to find them work and then to negotiate their deals. And we've learned along with our clients, and sometimes the only way to learn is the hard way. And that's you make the mistakes. You don't ask the right questions, or you learn what the questions are eventually that you need to ask. But I would say I personally have worked. obviously here in the United States, in Canada, Mexico City, and I'll use Mexico City as an example of what I think the promise of travel can be to other countries for work. And that is, I had no desire whatsoever to step foot in Mexico City. I grew up in the Midwest, I knew nothing about it, it just had no appeal. But I gotta tell you, I met the most wonderful people in Mexico City. These people knew more about cinema than anyone that I hung around with. They were absolutely phenomenal. And I had an opportunity to work in Germany as well and had a fantastic experience. So I think that's the promise of the adventure of working in other locations. There's two sort of downsides, I think, or categories of downsides that I think most artists experience. The most common one, of course, is the financial impact, the financial experience you have, and I can't emphasize that more. And then probably the other possible dangerous one is perhaps the culture of the facility, but it also may be the experience or lack of experience of a facility that takes on maybe more than they can handle, and then you are in a situation where you're working 24/7. Literally for weeks, and that can be hell on earth, and it can take its toll. And we've had that happen on numerous occasions with some of our artists going to other countries and other facilities. So I'm going to pass it on at this moment, but I think I can talk a little bit about the financial aspect of it, which I think is probably the most treacherous. It's the most obvious thing that's going to influence whether you have a good experience or whether you have a bad experience. And I also want to point out that I see a number of people in here that have worked all over the world and probably have as much combined experience as we have up here, and perhaps we can hear some of their tales as well.
I agree with you. I think the financial is the thing that is not written in any visa that you really need to investigate. So my story is a bit different. So I'm looking at the US from the outside in. So I've been invited to come here in 2003, 2004 to work on feature films. So I was a VFX producer in Canada. It took me in 2003 5 to 6 weeks to get the visa with the help of a specialized lawyer. It was kind of simple. I had nothing to expect, and it was kind of easy breezy. Came through officially, get the visa stamped, everything was good. But just to put in perspective, what was the state of the union in the world at that time? It was the war in Afghanistan in 2003, 2004. So imagine today going to the Los Angeles airport and getting your car screened with a mirror. The Terminal 6 in LAX was completely empty. So that was the spirit back then, but again, the transfer of work was quite easy and simple. So I did reapply for the exact same visa, which is an H-1B, last year. Again, I was back in Canada. I would come back here because this is where everything's happened. I have lots of friends here. This time around it took 7 months, and it took a big load of work from the immigration lawyer. It cost my company like probably 10 times what it cost me 12 years ago. And it is a much more difficult process because I came with the exact same experience. I'm the same person. I've applied for a visa that was already valid, so it was only an extension of a visa. But we got it done, everything's fine. But it's basically to reassess the fact that even if the law is very similar from one year to another, from a country to another, Canada and US have very similar conditions. It really depends on many other factors that's completely outside of our control. So I wanted to share that story because for me it was a very different experience at that point.
Okay, great. Yeah, so we have a long list of different things, but because taxes have been mentioned, I thought we should talk a little bit about, who to talk to, accountants, how do you deal with that? There's also length of time factors that you're at a certain country where things kick in or don't kick in, and trying to figure out how that impacts you and getting the money home again and so forth. So you guys have some stories about the taxes?
I can speak to the, before I left, I talked to some people that had worked at WETA and found out that I needed to have a CPA in New Zealand and a CPA in Los Angeles. And actually, the tax people here get, even though I was gone for an entire year, not a resident of California, I still had to pay taxes because I'm an American citizen, which was a surprise to me. I figured if I'm down there for a year, I would only pay their tax. But so it's worked out fine, but you do lose your Social Security. For that time, I was paid New Zealand dollars. So when I looked at my Social Security, monthly statement or whatever, I had $222 for 2016 earnings. So it does affect your retirement down the road if you're working out of the country for long periods of time. And it's just, like what you said, Bob, you don't learn it until you don't find out until you've gone through it what the ramifications are of your decision to do that type of thing.
I'll add to that, as was stated, I chair what was the Business Labor Law Committee, and we tried to create a forum, and actually we did create a forum, and it exists on the VES website, where we could invite members from around the world to basically tell their stories. What happened when you went to London? What happened when you went to New Zealand and whatnot? So that VES members who are now maybe for the first time going to go, that they had access to people that had been there before them, okay? And that's probably one resource that is available to VES members that could be helpful. And in spite of Ruth knowing, like we all do, to ask someone who's probably been there, everybody's situation is different. Everybody's tax situation is different. And so it's unlikely that you're going to probably get all the answers that you need, but it's probably the thing that you should focus on the most. And I would only add one other thing, and that is the exchange rate. Okay, so I will tell you a story of an artist that we represented that when everything was going to Vancouver about 3 years ago, we all know that, he thought, okay, I guess if I want to stay in features, that's where I have to go. The good news was we found a company that was based in Los Angeles that was willing to pay him as a CG supervisor what I would call an LA rate. And he, in particular, he had a wife and he had 2 children. She was not a US citizen, so he was Italian. So if she joined him in Canada, she wouldn't be able to work. So he had to calculate the effect of, and she was doing some Chiron work on a freelance basis here for some small television station. She was probably getting $30,000–$40,000 a year in additional income. And but he had to factor that he was going to lose that, and he had to do the calculation of whether or not this position would potentially offset that loss. And we were so focused on the salary, and we made the deal, and he got up there, and within 6 months, the exchange rate dropped about 30%. And I talked to him in preparation for this event because I thought it would be a good example of a story to share. And when I asked him, what is the thing you would do if you could do it all over again, what? And he said, I think we all agree that we would have tried to negotiate the rate, but have it based on either an average exchange rate over the last 3 years or some factor, because he wasn't going to be able to move his family right away, so he was going to be working in Vancouver but paying mortgage, rent here in LA, and that was one thing that we sort of missed. And so And especially when you go to countries that you're really not familiar with, that can be a real big gotcha. So exchange rates, cost of living, local taxes,
Where you live, what you drive.
exactly right.
Where you live, what you drive.
So anyway, that's,
You know, coming at this from a different perspective, and Eric, you're in our perspective. We're supervisors, so we get to ask for more. So that's from, I don't know what to call the artist people, but that's the artist people when you go to work for a company. When you're going to work for the production, you get to ask for a lot more things. You risk losing the job, but like, the first contract I ever saw in my life, I found by accident on a Xerox machine at a company called Corelco. And so I Xeroxed it and left the original there and learned that you could ask for things. Things like, if I'm on location, I get housing and transportation equivalent to, in my case, the DP. So I call the DP Favored Nations Clause. This started me reading legal books. Legal books are really boring, but boy, there's some gold in those things because you learn that precedents have been set and how to execute precedents. Now, every time you deal with a production company, it's all about precedents. Like after, I think I did 7 films for Warner Brothers, my 8th film, they claimed I'd never done a studio movie. And I pulled out all the contracts, go, look, 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 and they go, this Blood Diamond Limited, this was Last Samurai Limited, this was Deep Blue Sea Limited, and none of those say Warner Brothers on them, so you have no precedent. So those are the kinds of battles you get in. But what I would do, if they're sending me to Africa, I'm paid in US dollars in the United States. That doesn't, the exchange rate doesn't matter. If, because of the whole tax incentive thing that's going on, and they gotta pay me, you know, in Canadian dollars, I set in the contract the exchange rate, which seems like a good idea, but it is not always best. You're really happy when it drops 30%, and you're really unhappy when it goes up 30%. So you be careful what you negotiate for. But remember, the key point to this is that, well, there's 2 key points. The first key point that I was about to say is that the only way you can get anything is to be prepared to walk away from it if you don't get it. Once you set your price, it's your price. Once you agree to what you will do, then that's it. It's no real climbing the ladder. It's very hard to climb the ladder. I climbed the ladder. I got knocked down 3 films ago. They cut 20% of my annual salary. 2 films ago, they cut 20% more. And who's to blame is me for saying okay to it. Even though it was, from Chris DeFario, hello Chris, hope you see this, a one-time only, non-precedent setting, non-quotable thing. And then the next film was another Warner Brothers film, and Chris goes, but I know, so here's what I can do for you. And one of the other tactics was you have 5 seconds to decide because there's 500 of you people out there that'll do it for half the price. So 5, 4, 3, and you have to quickly agree to cut your own wrists or not. So the power is yours, but the second point, and probably more important, and why I think we formed the Business, Labor, and Law Committee all those years ago to start with, is knowing what you can ask for in a contract, knowing contractual forms is power for you. So, you know, there are people in this room that can advise you on contracts. There's Bob over here. What's his name up there? Wave your hand so they know you. Thank you.
Well, I want to go back to the exchange rates and the cost of living. My surprise in 2003, I'm Canadian, I live in Montreal, in one of the lowest cost of living in North America. Montreal is the equivalent of Detroit. So I say, hey, I'm going to go live in the US, get paid in the US, live in LA. Wow, this is going to be a great money deal on top of the experience and all that stuff. Well, the cost of living here is so much higher than it is in Canada, and the exchange rate at the end of the 2 years, I came back with no more money. I didn't lose anything, I didn't want anything. But what I won is the experience working with people, working in the industry. So I think this is really important to bring back to, on top of the financial, the visa, the legal, all that stuff, the wife or the kids or not of the above, the experience is on top, in my thinking, on top of all of those aspects when you decide to go work in a different country.
And I should mention Bob and his group on the Visual Effects Society site. There is a whole thing on calculating the current cost of living, and a whole section just on, you know, travel and moving and dealing with global issues, as we've talked about here.
That's correct, yes.
Yeah. I also had a blog post a number of years ago on effects deals and stuff, so it might be worth checking that out. Yeah, and as Jeff says, you know, what's included in your deal? Are they covering any of your travel expenses? Are you taking care of all your housing and so forth? You know, per diem, all those types of things start to really add up. And I know some people had some problems setting up like bank accounts and transferring money and getting credit cards and all the little things you don't really think of when you're based, you know, at one place and someplace totally different.
And that also includes using US credit cards that you did not charge a foreign currency fee?
Yeah, so it's all the little stuff as well that starts adding up to be aware of. And just to, I guess, touch on a couple other areas in terms of, you know, family. Obviously, if you're single, you know, you've got a certain situation that you're dealing with. But if you have a family with children or a spouse or somebody, then you've got to take a look at the situation of whether you want to be separate from them for a while. Maybe it's just a short gig, or, you know, it's a longer term. Now, you know, do they go to visit you, or do you can you take a break and fly back and visit them? And if they go with you, can they work? And as we've heard, you know, maybe not. And then children and schools and transferring and even dealing with pets and so forth. Do you guys have any?
I do. I have 2 kids, 2 boys, and we made a decision, conscious decision, my husband's in the business here, that they would not come with me and that they would come down for 2 weeks at Christmas. So I never came back to the US, so I saw them for 2 weeks at Christmas. Thank God for FaceTime, you know, because we FaceTimed all the time, and it felt like being at home. It wasn't being at home. But it was a great experience when they came down.
It was much harder in previous digital days to be gone for 6 months at a time or
True.
whatever.
True, yeah.
You know, I used to break into the hotel telephone system with my own video camera and hook it up to the TV. Those were fun times.
I was going to say, you know, there's not a lot of good news here, okay? There really isn't. In my case, if you have a family and you have a house, a mortgage, whatever, car, there isn't much percentage in taking a position outside of the country, and probably more specifically in Canada. In this particular case I mentioned earlier, there was an option that he could then be staff at this company. But after 6 months, he realized this just isn't working. And he came back, never to think of returning again to Vancouver. And I was talking to him about this, and I said, Ricardo, what advice would you have for, for young artists? And he is a little cynical, but he just said to me, don't expect to make money if you are a young, new artist. Don't expect to make any money. So that's the dark side of it. If you're faced with having to follow the work, the only advice I would have for new artists is be the best you can be, so you can, as Jeff referred to, ask and receive what you deserve as a visual effects artist. If you're a mediocre artist, if you're just filling a seat, if what you do is a commodity, you're just not going to make much money. You got to be really good, and that's the way it should be to do well. You should be really good. So strive for that, because that will allow you to ask and get. the things that you want. Because if they want you, they will find a way to get you.
Well, I agree with you on the money side. I don't think until you decide to leave for many, many years where you can re-estate, you know, your cost of living and a house and build. I mean, look, when you start, when you're young, you go in an apartment, then you buy a house, you do that within your own country, right? Try to do that in a different country for short term. So I agree with you. If somebody says, well, I need to go work in a different country for 6 months because I don't find a job locally here, that's really probably a cause for failure. I have a very positive view on this because my wife and I, which actually is in the audience today, we said, why don't we do this as an experience? You know, you do your day to day, you go to your job, and one day you wake up, you say, I think there's better in life to that, you know, status quo. So let's try to do something crazy. Let's go with the wife and the kids, work in a different country. It is a big experience. It is hard. We talk to each other every day. Should we do this? Should we do that? As a good example, we decided for me is I would come here for 4 months by myself. I have a small apartment, start my thing, get my stuff going on, my bank account, all that stuff, my routine, and then bring the rest of the family over later. And we say, well, that's a good thing. Then when they're going to come, I'll be settled, and that's going to be easier. So I agree with you on one side. If you try to do a quick and dirty job, I'm going to work in a different country. I'm going to go work in London. You know, try to find an apartment downtown. You know, so it's going to cost a lot. Find a place, all that stuff. But if you do want to live an experience, you put that up front. You say, this is what I want to do. The rest will be, you know, some obstacles, and I'm going to get through them at some point. But at the end of the day, I will live something in a different country, meeting with new people, grow my network, and later maybe that's going to be a benefit. That's exactly what happened to me. I was here 12 years ago. I come back. I already have that network, so it's easier the second time. God knows I may come back, you know, in 10 years, and that may be even easier. But I guess we need to start with the idea that this is going something a life-changing event. And that's should be the first step to do that.
I would agree that if you make the commitment and you literally say, I'm moving to Vancouver, I'm divesting of all my ties here in Los Angeles, I'm going to make a commitment and I'm going to Canada and I'm going to bring my wife and my kids and I'm going to put them through school, that is the only way to do it. You know, that's the way to do it, just as you are doing. But if a freelancer, unfortunately, lives by
Short term, yeah.
short term and where the work is, and so that can be very difficult. I just had a very long sort of conversation with a matte painter who is in Perth, Australia. And he wanted, his dream for his wife and him was to come to Los Angeles and work. But he really wanted to have a job. And I said,
I have the same dream.
yeah. I said, dude, that's getting very, very difficult. And just to make a long story short, what he ended up doing is he was offered a 2-year contract in Montreal, you know, with a major visual effects company. And so, sure enough, they are coming to Montreal, and he's going to work there for 2 years. But what he really wanted to do was get here to Los Angeles. But that involved visas.
He's closer.
And yeah, he's getting closer. Yeah. So.
Okay, why don't we touch on like health and safety? Obviously, there's different areas of the world where safety can be a concern. And including some of the different companies may not be in the safest neighborhood, or the housing that you might be able to afford may not be in the safest area. I guess the other thing in terms of the health is I would suggest anybody, if you're going overseas, especially for any length of time, you consider getting your dental and physical done before you leave. Because, you know, obviously it's a problem if you get sick at the location. And so that brings up the whole issue also of health coverage and insurance. And is there any? Will it kick in? How long does that take? All those types of things. And even getting meds in other countries if you're there for a short time. I've had problems trying to ship medications, you know, and so trying to get a hold of the correct medications has been a problem. But
And knowing also that even some of the stuff we take here over the counter are illegal in other countries. For instance, there's a hormonal thing that people take to sleep. I forgot the name of it, of course. Melatonin is illegal in New Zealand. It's considered a drug.
But on the other hand, in Mexico and Thailand, everything is over the counter. And our crew suffered from that, including our director of photography, who literally went berserk and ran off into the jungle. Missing for 2 days.
So do you guys have any other thoughts about health and things like that, or?
Here's my plan. I've been in some really horrible, scary places. I've been shot at. I've been in 2 helicopter crashes, you know, and what you learn is you negotiate up front what the health coverage is, and then you, because your life is your most valuable thing, you fill in the holes on it. And in those negotiations comes this new thing. It started on Blood Diamond for me when the studio attempted to make me liable for, oh, I forgot the legal terminology now, but essentially, no, what they were doing is saying that you're gonna go there with a visual effects crew and it's on you. Their safety is on you, yeah. I had to indemnify the studio against loss and death of a crew that I wasn't picking, going to a location that I had no control over. You know, so that became a real stickling point in our contract. But additionally, I have a health tip for you all. Yeah, I learned this in Mexico. When we were shooting in Mexico, Bob, I got something 3 weeks in, I don't know what it was. Couldn't leave the bathroom, you know?
I think I might know what that was.
So I went to the production and I said, oh, you know that? And they said, oh, here's the American doctor, and he's gonna blah, 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 and they gave me the thing. 3 weeks later, got hit with it again. Went to the American doctor, I said, you know, what was it? And he goes, da-da-da, and I go, da-da-da. And there's a Mexican doctor next door, and I went to him, and he's really looked like Barney Fife. And he put his cowboy boots on the table and kicked his chair back and reached down and picked up this bottle of cheap tequila and slammed it on the table, and he said, a shot every night at bedtime. And I've never been sick on location since, and I've done that everywhere around the world. Every night at bedtime. It has to be cheap tequila. It can't be good. But it's worked, and you get great sleep. Like Tim.
We brought in a colorist one time to Mexico, and this was a Virgin Television de Mexico. It was a commercial post-production facility, but it was a high-end facility in Zona Rosa in Mexico City, but we were staying at the Hotel Nico, which was kind of nice. Well, this poor guy got hit with that, and luckily we had the hotel doctor. You know, the hotel has a physician, but he was down for the count for a week, just miserable. It was very sad, but luckily we were at a very nice hotel in Mexico City, in it was the equivalent of Beverly Hills, Polanco, and but he spent a week at his hotel room.
Something else to be aware too is you need to check out your geographic region for what is going on there. In Africa, in one area, it was blue tick fever. None of us knew what it was, and the symptoms mimic, you know, that tropical disease they used to get, malaria. So all the crew ended up in the hospital being diagnosed with blue tick fever instead of malaria. And we had to take malaria pills because we were shooting at ground zero of malaria for Africa. And we did our research ahead of time, and there's 2 different treatments ahead of time. And it's Malarone pills, which you take every day and only lead to mild psychotic breakdowns, so that's a side effect. And then there's this other thing you take once a month that's guaranteed to give you a psychotic breakdown. So what would happen is once a day somebody would go berserk, and you're going, well, right? So I go into catering, right? I like coffee. I go into catering and I go for a cup of coffee, and there's a cup, but there's no coffee. And so I say to the chef, I go, well, where's the coffee? And he goes, oh, the coffee's coming. Coffee comes, they only had 50 cups for 125 people in the crew. And I didn't get a cup. And I went berserk. I leapt over the table, I knocked everything over, I grabbed the chef by his neck, and my visual effects team pulled me off of him. But the thing is, that's great, is the whole crew goes, oh, another Malrun moment. So you gotta learn these things before you go there.
And know about socialized medicine. If you're spoiled here with your own doctors and you get into, ended up in the hospital in New Zealand because I had an accident, and so they gave me a drug. I told them I was allergic to morphine, and they gave me a drug that was a derivative of morphine. I didn't do my research on it, so I ended up in the hospital. And socialized medicine is a completely different ballgame. Waiting a long time. Anyway, obviously I'm alive and fine, but.
I think the key is you have to take responsibility
Yeah.
for yourself in all aspects and think it through, and then decide where your line slides to, because sometimes the experience is worth it, you know?
I mean, certainly with the internet these days, you can do quite a bit of research ahead of time, so that's certainly worth doing. One of the other key things, of course, is the weather at the location that you're going to be dealing with. If you're going to some place with snow or rain all the time, or other extreme temperatures and things like that, you want to make sure you pack for it and have the clothing and other things to handle that.
And if you're going to Vancouver, get a happy light. Does anyone know what a happy light is? It's a light that you stare in, and it makes you happy.
Because the
They have
sun
them in
only comes
Alaska.
out once
And
every
they-
month.
Right.
So
They
it's
call them
always
happy
great.
lights in Alaska, and they're required. It's literally a light. There's vitamin D that comes from the light, and it helps you with your mood thing, because you get majorly depressed when it's dark all the time. And so,
You had a good buddy of mine who was living in Montreal, was, had whatever, snow or rain, whatever, and lived in Vancouver for 9 months, and he was supposed to be there 2 years. And he came back on the East Coast, exactly for that reason. He was a very sporty kind of guy, was outside, said, 5 months of rain, I couldn't take it anymore. But they have amazing ski in the winter.
yeah, happy lights.
Montreal. I spent 3 months there when it was winter. And the only happy thing I found at that time was in the morning. In the morning, they were telling the weather, and they would say, oh, it will be minus 25 degrees outside, but it will feel like minus 30 because of the wind. And then they will say, in Ottawa, it's minus 40 degrees and it feels like 45. And I was saying, yes, I'm in Montreal. That was the only happy thing about these 3 months during the winter.
So now you understand why I like to be here, right?
Yes.
That goes beyond all the hassle of the visa and the financial,
Is the weather.
it's the weather.
You
I
moved
was
here
raised
for the
in
weather.
Montreal. I lived in Montreal for the TMR for the first 10 years of my life, and I loved
Do you remember?
Montreal. Very vividly. I love Montreal.
Yeah.
And I love the winters, and then we moved to Chicago, so it was probably worse. Chicago was worse, I think, than Montreal.